This lecture is on world forests and covers the material in Chapter 6, Section 6.1 of the textbook. The learning objectives for this section are for you to understand 1. What portion of the world's original forests remain, 2. What activities threaten global forests and what steps can be taken to preserve them, and 3. Why is road construction a challenge to forest conservation? Forests, woodland, pastures, and rangelands together occupy almost 60% of global land cover. These ecosystems provide many of our essential resources, such as lumber, paper pulp, and grazing for livestock. They also provide essential ecological services, including regulating climate, controlling water runoff, providing wildlife habitat, purifying air and water, and supporting rainfall. Forests and grasslands also have scenic, cultural, and historic values that deserve protection, but these are also among the most heavily disturbed ecosystems. This drawing shows the world land use and forest types. Forests make up 29% of the world's land, and range and pasture make up nearly the same amount, 27%. The other category includes tundra, desert, wetlands, and urban areas. Of the forest and woodland land use type, we can further divide this category into the biome types that we learned about in Chapter 5. By far, the tropical moist forest and the boreal forests make up the highest percentage of existing forests. Note the temperate forests, of the sort that we might be most familiar with in the eastern United States, makes up only 11% of the world's forests. Can you think of any reasons why this might be the case? Forests are a huge carbon sink, storing some 422 billion metric tons of carbon in standing biomass. Clearing and burning of forests is responsible for about 17% of all the carbon released by human actions every year, more than all vehicles combined, and is a major factor in global climate change. Moisture released from forests affects rainfall, not only locally, but sometimes far away. For example, recent climate studies suggest that deforestation of the Amazon could reduce precipitation in the American Midwest. Among the forests of greatest ecological importance are the remnants of primeval forests that are home to much of the world's biodiversity, endangered species, and indigenous human cultures. Sometimes called frontier forests, old-growth forests are those that cover a relatively large area and have been undisturbed by human activities long enough that trees can live out a natural life cycle and ecological processes can occur in fairly normal fashion. Even though forests still cover about half the area they once did worldwide, only 1/4 of those forests retain old-growth features. The largest remaining areas of old-growth forest are in Russia, Canada, Brazil, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. Together, these 5 countries account for more than 3/4 of all relatively undisturbed forests in the world. In general, remoteness, rather than laws, protect these forests. Although official data describe only about 1/5 of Russian old-growth forest as threatened, rapid deforestation, both legal and illegal, especially in the Russian Far East, probably puts a much greater area at risk. Here we see a tropical rainforest in Queensland, Australia. Primary or old-growth forests such as this aren't necessarily composed entirely of huge old trees. Instead, they have trees of many sizes and species that contribute to complex ecological cycles and relationships. This graph shows forest area and annual net change for the time period from 2005 to 2010. The largest annual net deforestation rate in the world is in Africa. Note, however, that Africa, South America, and Oceania all show a net loss of forest. Largely because China has planted 50 billion trees in the past decade, Asia has a net increase in forest area. Europe also is gaining forest, while North and Central America have had no net change. So what is all this wood used for? Well, let's find out. Wood plays a part in more activities of the modern economy than does any other commodity. There is hardly any industry that does not use wood or wood products somewhere in its manufacturing and marketing processes. Think about the amount of junk mail, newspapers, photocopies, and other paper products that each of us in developed countries handles, stores, and disposes of in a single day. Total annual world wood consumption is about 4 billion cubic meters. This is more than steel and plastic consumption combined. International trade in wood and wood products amounts to more than $100 billion each year. Developed countries produce less than half of all industrial wood, but account for more than 80% of its consumption. Less developed countries, mainly in the tropics, produce more than half of all industrial wood, but use only 20%. Paper pulp, the fastest growing type of forest product, accounts for nearly a fifth of all wood consumption. Most of the world's paper is used in the wealthier countries of North America, Europe, and Asia. Global demand for paper is increasing rapidly. Monoculture forestry, such as this Wisconsin tree farm, produces valuable timber and pulpwood, but has little biodiversity. Approximately 1/4 of the world's forests are managed for wood production. Ideally, forest management involves scientific planning for sustainable harvests, with particular attention paid to forest regeneration. In temperate regions, according to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, more land is being replanted or allowed to regenerate naturally than is being permanently deforested. Much of this reforestation, however, is in large plantations of single species, single use, intensive cropping called monoculture forestry. Although this produces rapid growth and easier harvesting than a more diverse forest, a dense single species stand often supports little biodiversity and does poorly in providing the ecological services, such as soil erosion control and clean water production, that may be of the greatest value of native forest. Tropical forests are among the richest and most diverse terrestrial systems. Although they now occupy less than 10% of the Earth's land surface, these forests are thought to contain more than 2/3 of all higher plant biomass and at least half of all the plant, animal, and microbial species in the world. A century ago, an estimated 12.5 million square kilometers, an area larger than the entire United States, of the tropics were covered with closed canopy forest. The FAO estimates that only about 40% of that forest remains in its original condition, and that about 10 million hectares, or about 0.6% of the existing tropical forests, are cleared each year. These three sequential photos show forest destruction in Rondônia, Brazil, between 1975 and 2001. Construction of logging roads creates a feather-like pattern that opens forests to settlement by farmers. A variety of factors contribute to deforestation, and different forces predominate in various parts of the world. Logging for valuable tropical hardwoods, such as teak and mahogany, is generally the first step. Although loggers might take only one or two of the largest trees per hectare, the canopy of tropical forests is usually so strongly linked by vines and interlocking branches that felling one tree can bring down a dozen others. Building roads to remove logs kills more trees, but even more important, it allows entry to the forest by farmers, miners, hunters, and others who cause further damage. Slash and burn agriculture is a significant method of deforestation. Loggers first remove valuable hardwoods. Then farmers enter the forest and initiate slash and burn agriculture. This method, the farmers cut down the remaining trees made accessible by logging roads and burn the trees to add nutrients to the otherwise thin, acidic soil of the rainforest. However, after a few years, the soil is depleted and the farmers move on, repeating the process again and again, expanding agricultural areas and eventually following loggers deeper into the rainforest to repeat the entire process once again. In Africa, conversion of forest into small-scale agriculture accounts for nearly two-thirds of all tropical forest destruction. In Latin America, poor, landless farmers often start the deforestation but are bought out or driven out after a few years by large-scale farmers or ranchers. Cattle ranching can increase pressure for forest destruction, but in the proper setting, cattle can also assist forest regeneration by dispersing seeds. How can we finance forest protection and restoration in developing countries? One of the few positive things to come out of recent UN climate conferences is an agreement in principle to fund the REDD program, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation in developing countries. This idea was first proposed by Papua New Guinea and Costa Rica at international climate talks in 2005. It aims to protect existing forests and restore degraded tropical land. Administered by the United Nations Environment Program, this mechanism, if it succeeds, will represent a massive transfer of money from rich countries to poor ones as part of a commitment to reduce the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions. Tropical countries aren't unique in harvesting forests at an unsustainable rate. Northern countries, such as the United States and Canada, also have allowed controversial forest management practices in many areas. For many years, the official policy of the United States Forest Service was multiple use, which implied that the forests could be used for everything that we might want to do there simultaneously. Some uses are incompatible, however. Birdwatching, for example, isn't very enjoyable in an open-pit mine, and protecting species that need unbroken, old-growth forest isn't easy when you cut down the forest. Some of the most contentious forestry issues in the United States and Canada in recent years have centered on logging in old-growth, temperate rainforests in the Pacific Northwest. These forests have incredibly high levels of biodiversity and can accumulate 5 times as much standing biomass per hectare as a tropical rainforest. These forests are also important as critical habitat for many endemic species, such as the northern spotted owl, Vaux's swift, and the marbled murrelet, which live nowhere else on Earth. The huge trees of the old-growth temperate rainforest accumulate more total biomass in standing vegetation per unit area than any other ecosystem on Earth. They provide habitat to many rare and endangered species, but they are also converted by loggers who can sell a single tree for thousands of dollars. Most lumber and pulp wood in the United States and Canada currently are harvested by clear cutting, in which every tree in a given area is cut regardless of size. This is by far the most economical way for a company to harvest wood resources, but it also produces the most damage. Some alternatives to clear cutting include shelter wood harvesting, in which mature trees are removed in a series of 2 or more cuts, strip cutting, in which all the trees in a narrow corridor are harvested, or selective cutting, in which only a small percentage of the mature trees are taken in each 10 or 20-year rotation. These alternative methods are a more ecologically acceptable method as they preserve the ecosystem and habitat while still providing adequate use of the land. The results of clear cutting can be grim. Large clear cuts, such as this, threaten species dependent on old-growth forest and expose steep slopes to soil erosion. Restoring something like the original forest will take hundreds of years. Some argue that logging should be restricted to privately owned lands. Just 4% of the nation's timber comes from national forests, and this harvest adds only about $4 billion to the American economy per year. In contrast, recreation, fish and wildlife, clean water, and other ecological services provided by the forest, by their calculations, are worth at least $224 billion each year. Timber industry officials, on the other hand, dispute these claims, arguing that logging not only provides jobs and supports rural communities, but also keeps forests healthy. What do you think? Could we make up for decreased timber production from public lands by more intensive management of private holdings and by substitution of recycling of wood products? Are there alternative ways you could suggest to support communities now dependent on timber harvesting? Roads on public lands are another controversy. Over the past 40 years, the Forest Service has expanded its system of logging roads more than tenfold to a current total of nearly 550,000 kilometers, or more than 10 times the length of the interstate highway system. Government economists regard road building as a benefit because it opens up the country to motorized recreation and industrial uses. Wilderness enthusiasts and wildlife supporters, however, see this as an expensive and disruptive program. In 2001, President Bill Clinton established a plan to protect 23.7 million hectares of de facto wilderness from roads. Land developers, logging, mining, and energy companies protested this roadless rule. President G.W. Bush overturned the roadless rule and ordered resource managers to expedite logging, mining, and motorized recreation. In 2009, President Obama ordered the rule reinstated. He noted that this measure protects habitat for 1,600 endangered species, including bears and owls, and watersheds for 60 million people. Following a series of disastrous fire years in the 1930s in which hundreds of millions of hectares of forest were destroyed, whole towns burned to the ground, and hundreds of people died, the United States Forest Service adopted a policy of aggressive fire control in which every blaze on public land was to be put out before 10 a.m. Smokey Bear was adopted as the forest mascot and warns us all only you can prevent forest fires. Recent studies, however, of fire's ecological role suggest that our attempts to suppress all fires may have been misguided. Many biological communities are fire adapted and require periodic burning for regeneration. Furthermore, eliminating fire from these forests has allowed woody debris to accumulate, greatly increasing the chances of a very big fire. By suppressing fires and allowing fuel to accumulate, we make major fires such as this more likely. The safest and most ecologically sound management policy for some forests may be to allow natural or prescribed fires, which don't threaten property or human life, to burn periodically. In the 1990s, the U.S. Forest Service began to shift its policies from a timber production focus to ecosystem management, which attempts to integrate sustainable ecological, economic, and social goals in a unified systems approach. This slide represents some of the guiding principles of ecosystem management. These principles include managing across whole landscapes, watersheds, or regions over ecological timescales, depend on scientifically sound, ecologically credible data for decision-making, consider human needs in promoting sustainable economic development and communities, maintain biological diversity and essential ecosystem processes, utilize cooperative institutional arrangements, generate meaningful stakeholder and public involvement, and adapt management over time based on conscious experimentation and routine monitoring. As we consider the human use of forest resources, we come to understand that deforestation and ecologically unacceptable methods of harvesting are not sustainable. In order to provide wood resources into the future, the United States Forest Service has created a draft set of sustainable forestry practices shown on this slide. As you can see, these criteria provide for harvesting and use of important resources, but also take into account the provision of ecological services and protection of biodiversity.